Hello friends. Up to now what we have discussed is what is covered under goods as service tax. To be taxed as goods as services. What will be specifically taxed as goods or taxed as services. But important term now. We have to understand. What is the supply? Because we are talking about tax on supply of goods and services or goods or services under GST. So what all is covered under the meaning of supply? Word supply is covered under Section 7. There is no specific definition of the word supply as such. But Section 7 lists out what all will be covered, what all will be treated as supply. Either supply of goods, or supply of services or both. And that will be chargeable to GST. So, if it is treated as a supply of goods or services, then GST is payable. If any transaction is not treated as supply of goods or services, it is not chargeable under GST. So it is a charging parameter we can say to decide whether GST is payable or not. So let us try to understand what all is covered under the meaning of word supply under Section 7. Broadly, there are three categories that are covered under the definition or meaning of the word supply. We can say the first one is supply covers sale, transfer, barter, exchange, license, or disposal, made or agreed to be made, for consideration, in the course or furtherance of business. Second is import of services for consideration, whether or not in the course or furtherance of business. And third one is activities specified in Schedule 1 of the Act, made or agreed to be made without consideration. So see supply covered broadly, the three categories. The first one is sell, transfer, barter, etc. We're going to discuss in detail all the three elements, but just have a quick look at this first. Sale, transfer, barter, exchange, etc. This all is either made or agreed to be made for consideration. So if there is no consideration for supply, transfer, sale, exchange, then it will not be treated as supply, at least under this first clause. Then second is import of services. Only services, not goods. We're talking only important services. This is made for consideration, whether or not in the course or further of business. We'll discuss this, but just I am highlighting the key points so that you can focus on this. And when we discuss it, it will be again highlighted to you. The third one is activities, specified in Schedule 1. It makes a list of such activities, wherein, whether you supply the goods or services, even without consideration, then also, they will be treated as supplies. So something given free of cost, without consideration, that will be also treated as supply, and you have to pay tax on some calculated value that is also covered in our subsequent topic of valuation. So let us take one by one. First component of this. That is regarding sell, transfer, barter, exchange, etc. Under this, try to understand what it means. For the word supply, sale, transfer, barter, exchange, license, lease or disposal, made or agreed to be made for consideration, in the course or furtherance of business. Now what do you mean by business? Is covered under the definition, is separately discussed in the definitions lecture. So, what you have to cover here is number 1 is sale. So sale of goods. You're selling the goods in a shop. We're purchasing the goods, the seller is selling the goods. That is treated as supply. Transfer. Transfer means transfer of goods from one factory to another factory. There are two factories of a person, located in one in Maharashtra, one in Gujarat. So transfer of goods from one factory to another factory is also treated as goods, provided following three conditions are fulfilled. That is why we're divided in two parts. This all type of transactions will be treated as supply. If these three conditions are fulfilled. What are the three conditions? They are made or agreed to be made. Means actually they are supplied or agreed that it will be suppressed. For consideration. And in the course of business. Then, only this kind of a transfer will be treated as supply. Next one. Giving goods. In exchange other. Suppose you are having old mobile. You give it. And in exchange, you take another wristwatch. So you give the old mobile and take a wristwatch shopkeeper. So it is kind of a barter, or exchange of goods. License to use an asset, for example software license, we purchase the software license Office. Microsoft Office. That is a license that we're purchasing. So that is also supply. Renting of machinery. That is also supplied. Leasingly of equipment. That is also supplied. Disposal of old machine. That is also treated as supply. So we'll just discuss the few examples of all these kind of transactions. Sale. Transfer. Barter. Exchange, etc. Now try to understand the other conditions. The first one out of that is made or agreed to be made. What it means. Advance received for goods to be supplied in future. Whether that will be treated as a supply. See this clause. Made or agreed to be made. It means you're not sold of goods. But you're agreed to sell the goods. And for that you receive advance. So that advance received is also taxable as a supplier under Section 7. You have received advance for agreeing to make a supply. So that is also treated as a supply under Section 7. Then, another thing is, all these things, all these activities that we talked about like sale, transfer, etc. should be for consideration. So if you are giving something on lease or rental without consideration, then at least under this clause, it is not treated as supply. But we have to understand the remaining two clauses. Whether that can be covered, we have to check. So at least under this clause, if you transfer, if you give your own mobile to exchange, as a considerations, you receive nothing. You just donated that. So that cannot be treated as a supply. Because there is no consideration. So it must be consideration. Sale. Transfer. Barter. Exchange. License. Rental. Lease or disposal. All these activities must be for consideration. An example, say you are having an old computer that you donated to a school. So that will not be treated as a supply or transaction. Because there is no consideration. And the last point for this is all this activity should be in the course of or further of a business. To the sale. Transfer. Barter, etc. This should be part-time parcel of your business. Either in the course of your business activity. Or furtherance. Or for the purpose of business activities. You're doing these kind of sales. Barter. Activities. Then it will be treated as supplies. For example, a personal car sold by Mr. A. A is having his personal car. He sold that car. So this is not in the course of his business is something different. It might be different but seen as asset. He is selling his car, which is his personal asset, not a business asset. Not in the course of business. So this sale will not be treated as a supply. For the purpose of GST. There is no need for Mr. A to pay tax under GST for this. So, this was the first type that is covered under the definition of supply. So we have discussed first category. That is covered under the shop of supply. Anything out of the sale. Transfer, etc. For consideration in the course of business. Now let us see the second category. Import of service. What we do is considered as supply, under GST. Of services is treated as supply. if there is for consideration, whether or not in the course or furtherance of business. It means, if you're importing services for business or for personal use. Both cases of the import of services are treated as supplies. Let us take one example. Import of goods. Whether it will be treated as supply. No. Because it is not an import of service. Only import of service are considered under this category for supply. Another example. Fashion designing services are important but personal grooming. One fellow. He want professional fashion designing services from professional fashion designer outside India. So he has imported the services. So whether it will be treated as a supply, irrespective of the fact that whether these import are for the purpose of business or not. Whether or not for the purpose of business. So even the personal grooming. If you're importing the services that will be treated as supply, the tax will be payable under GST Act. So what you have to remember here is, we have the SKUs2 scenario. The first scenario is of supply. Includes sale, transfer, barter, exchange, etc. In first case, as well as in the second case. The common factor was, all these activities should be for consideration. But in the first case it was only for business. Now in the second case, whether it is for business or not, both personal as well as business transactions are both covered if it is import of service. First two categories now we have discussed. Before we move to the third categories, just a quick look at once again this chart. And recap. Whereas the third activity specified in Schedule 1 will be without consideration. We're going to discuss that. Then second thing is the first category list out all type of transactions like sale, transfer, barter, etc. And these are in the course of business. Whereas import of service may be or may not be in the course of business. There is a difference. And the third thing. That is very important. Over here, made or agreed to be made. That is even the advance. Advance received for the supply made in future is also covered, but this is not covered in the remaining two. In the remaining two it is not covered. So it is just for our quick comparison or the three cases. Now we will move to the third case. Activities which are specified in Schedule 1. Irrespective whether they are made or without made with consideration that will be treated and that will be taxable as supply. So, let us go for Schedule 1 now.